we have our guest speaker this evening is Brian Pugh. Brian is the area agronomist for the northeast part of the state, but I think past couple of years that district has extended, and I think he's covering about a third of the state now. Is that correct, Brian?
Yeah, it's a little smaller than what it was. So yeah.
He's covering quite a territory, but Brian's been the area agronomist up there in Muskogee for about the past 10 or so years, 10, 12 years, I think. And is that about right, Brian?
Close enough.
Close enough. Time gets away when you're having fun, but
yep.
We appreciate Brian being with us this evening. He's going to cover this. And for those of you that are watching here with us live, there will be 1 hour's worth of CEU credit for 1A, which is ag plant. That will apply to you guys that are private applicators. As most of you know, you have to fulfill at least 16 hours of CEU credit before your license expires at the end of 2023 to be able to just renew that license without having to retest. So this is an opportunity to get one of those hours tonight. So what you will need, if you are planning on getting that CEU credit, if you can go ahead and have your private applicator number looked up, when we request that, you will have it, and that should speed us up. But if you have questions, we invite you to ask those questions. What we have asked that you do is that you type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and I have that open, and we are watching that. So if you have those questions, feel free to type them in. I'll try to get them relayed to Brian, and he'll get them answered as soon as he can, and we will try to get all those answered for you tonight. So without anything further, thank everyone, but we're going to turn this over to Brian and let him talk with you about some brush control methods. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Justin. Again, appreciate all y'all having me here tonight, and excited to get to talk a little bit about this and maybe help some of y'all get some CEU credits. I know that's going to be very important as we go into the future for all of our private applicators that don't want to take the closed book test now. You know, it's a good thing that we have the opportunity to get these CEUs. So again, I'm going to spend a little bit of time tonight. We're going to start off talking about brush control methods, give you some ideas of some different ways that we can basically get brush under control. And then we're going to move from that into some different species specific control strategies. And I'll kind of try to go along here. Again, Justin, if you don't mind, if you've got questions that are pretty timely, just feel free to stop me at any point. This needs to be fairly informal, I feel like, for it to be more like a conversation. But again, getting going here with brush control methods tonight. See if I can get my computer working. We are going to be talking quite a bit, especially as we get a little further in the program here, about herbicides. And as always recommend to read and follow the label directions, prior to any herbicide use. I always try to tell producers that the label is the law. And really, when it comes down to it, if you're the applicator, all that burden is on you to make sure that you know what you're applying and you're applying it correctly. So again, Justin, the other educators that are on here, myself, Mike Trammell, one of our other area agronomists, we're all here to try to help you make the right decisions, but ultimately it never hurts for you to read the label as well. And I always make the joke, what better thing to do on a Friday night than grab a glass of tea and read a herbicide label. That's some real interesting reading. So to get started here tonight, really, I think introduction of brush control in eastern Oklahoma is, why do we have so much brush? And really, it's just a factor of the soils that we have, environmental conditions, rainfall. Traditionally, we've had quite a bit of wooded areas in eastern Oklahoma. And really, if we look back into, say, prehistory, hundreds of years ago, we had a lot of fire that ran across the landscape, and that fire tended to keep a lot of our brush suppressed. It tended to, keep a lot of those prairies open. And honestly, with the fragmentation of ag habitat that we've seen over the last 100 years, definitely here in the last 50 years, fire has become more of a liability. It's scary to some producers to use fire, and we see this re-encroachment of this succession of brush coming back into some of these grassy areas. So we get a lot of questions on, well, how do we control that brush? And really, the first thing that most people think about is they want to go directly to herbicides, directly to chemicals. And I think a lot of times, it's fun for producers, for ourselves to go out and spray a plant and see it die within a few weeks, or at least see it get very sick. I don't know why it is, but that seems to be rewarding to a lot of people. But I want you to know tonight, really, chemical strategies may be one of the last things that I look at. One of the first things I look at, whether it's a weed or a brush species, is why do we have that? And ultimately, it usually comes down to management leading up to this point in time that can tell us, why do we have this species here? Why do we have a problem with this species? And usually chemicals, herbicides, are nothing but a Band-Aid. So yeah, we can get some herbicides that will do a really good job of controlling, different weeds or different brush species, but it's simply a Band-Aid. It's simply a short-term fix. And if we don't fix the original management that got us into the position we're in, we're just going to have that problem come right back. So that's kind of my soapbox spiel when it comes to using herbicides on brush control, because really brush control is expensive. Most of the options that we look at, it's a fair bit of cost. And then secondly, I want you to consider all future income streams. I've talked to quite a few producers that back in the 80s, early 90s, spent a lot of money going in and killing brush and making open pasture land. And looking back, they say now, I probably make more money off my wildlife leases than what I make off of actually running cows on that land. I wish I'd left a lot more of that as timber. So if you've got a pretty good sized acreage, or you're in a really maybe good deer hunting area, you need to consider those things that, what we're doing today, killing a closed canopy forest with 30, 40, 50-year-old trees, it may take a while to get back to that point if future generations think that's important. So again, some of the reasons for brush control: just maintenance, keeping brush at bay, like out in pastures, maybe rescue. I get calls on this quite frequently through each summer. Maybe we went in and dozed an area 4, 5, 6 years ago, and it's just about to take back over. How do we knock these invaders back down? Maybe you're wanting to convert. Again, maybe we're taking that closed canopy forest and converting it into grassland. Again, dual purpose is something to consider. And then also land value. And I think this is becoming ever more important. It wasn't too far of a stretch that even back around 2000, 2002, 2004, a lot of times we could just about spend as much on brush control as what the land's value was. But in this day and age, we see now that most land is worth quite a bit more than it was then. So a lot of people are wanting to go in and clean some of that land back up and get it back into production. Again, if we do something up front to try to control this brush, we have to understand there's got to be follow-up. I always tell people, whether it's weeds or brush, this is not a one and done strategy. We can't roll in 1 year, get great control, and expect it to be done for the next 20 years. It's going to take a management plan year after year in the future to make sure we keep that brush species down. One of the cheapest things that we can do as follow-up, especially if we do get to that chemical option in year one, is going to be fire. Fire does a really nice job of keeping, whether it be resprouts or new sprouts that are coming up, or even some of the bigger trees that might be left and we didn't totally pick it up with the herbicide. Fire is a great option to help keep that cleaned up in the future. And Justin asked me to spend a little time on fire tonight, so we're going to touch on that for a little bit. And again, chemical treatments, like I said, they're not a one and done either. Sometimes we might need to go 3-4 years in a row with chemical treatments. We'll talk a little bit more about when that might be necessary later tonight. Or we might need to at least look at every 5 to 10 years coming in with a fairly strong brush herbicide package to keep those invaders at bay. Again, a lot of us, as we get, especially out into central Oklahoma, we've got cedar problems, and those cedars grow very rapidly. And the sheer fact is, if we're not using fire and if we're not controlling those cedars in some other method, we're going to see a cedar thicket within 10 to definitely 20 years. And we've seen that all over western Oklahoma, north central Oklahoma. So again, cedars are a very serious problem that we should take note of. So always try to tell people, use a brush control strategy. I like to see it when we sit down and we look at what is the most abundant species, and let's try to control it first. Really, that's the way that my mind works. It doesn't matter if we're talking about weed control in a pasture, say an introduced pasture of Bermuda. If ragweed makes up 90% of the weed population and maybe a little tougher weed like horse nettle makes up 5% of the population, I'm probably going to focus on the ragweed first because it's causing the most reduction in forage. So again, keep that in mind. Kill the easy or the most abundant species first. Use that fire to follow up. And again, individual tree treatments really come in pretty nice when we can go in with a blanket method in year one, knock 90% of that brush back down. Individual tree treatments, although they take a little bit more labor, really do a nice job of completing that cleanup strategy. Again, it's going to take years. Some different methods that we'll touch on here, dozing or logging, again, can be fairly expensive. What you're seeing on the left there is where they take a couple big dozers, a lot of times D8s. They'll run a big chain in between them and they'll actually pull those cedars down, pull them out of the ground. Again, that takes quite a bit of fuel and it costs quite a bit of money. Follow-up retreatments will be needed, and really you should consider whether you're going to use chemical or fire before you ever start that process. So dozing or logging is not cheap. Goats would be another option, and we're getting quite a few people starting to look at multi-species grazing and using goats as not only a form to help reduce brush encroachment, but actually, make some gain on some young goats and make a little extra money in the enterprise there. So that's the nice thing about the goats is they can eat that brush, convert that into pounds of red meat, and we can make some money off of it. So now let's spend just a few minutes here, maybe 8 or 10 minutes on fire. Fire is really one of the cheapest, most effective methods that we have for brush suppression, especially if we're dealing with, say, resprouts or smaller trees. When we get into very large trees, it's a little harder to use fire right off the bat to totally eliminate that stand. But we'll show you some pictures here of some options that you might have if you're dealing with a closed canopy forest. One of the important things to remember about fire is you must have adequate fuel load in order for it to work. So if you're on a severely overgrazed site, maybe you've got 1 inch of fuel height at the end of the winter, that's not enough fuel to carry a fire across and really to get anything done. So fire takes some pre-planning, some pre-grazing management to make sure we've got fuel there whenever we're ready to push that fire across it. Again, on mature brush, if you think about a lot of our closed canopy forests in eastern Oklahoma, and I'll show you a picture of that here in just a minute, really the only thing underneath them is just some leaf litter. And even if we're fairly dry, middle of summer, most of the time that leaf litter just doesn't produce enough intensity to kill a lot of those big trees. So really on mature brush, sometimes we need to reduce that canopy cover either through thinning or logging, or maybe even herbicide use. And when we open up that canopy and we let sunlight in back down to the soil surface, what happens? Well, we get an increase in the amount of fine fuel. We get grass production, forb production, brambles start to grow there. All of those things can be used as fuel in future years to make a little more intense fire. Big thing to remember is that burning interval will really determine are resprout brush populations and how big they get. So the more frequently we push that fire across the landscape, we expect those resprouts to not get quite as big. Another thing that OSU's working on right now, really got some good research going on, is fire timing through different points of the year and how fire timing itself influences brush control and brush suppression. So this is that picture I was just talking about. This is our typical closed canopy forest in eastern Oklahoma. If you're a little farther west in the cross timbers area, you won't see the pines in there. But I think we could all agree that we've seen quite a bit of ground that looks like this in eastern Oklahoma. And if you've never got the opportunity to go to the Pushmataha Wildlife Management Area, we try to do a prescribed fire tour there every October. And we typically do it the first week of October. And it is well worth your time to go down there because you get to see over 30 years of OSU prescribed fire research and how it has affected the different vegetation there on that site. So I'm going to show you a few pictures from that research. Again, this is the control. This is where we do nothing. Again, closed canopy forest. Thousands of acres like that in eastern Oklahoma. And again, back over 30 years ago, they went into those sites. They harvested the pine. They thinned the hardwoods on some of these treatments. And then they put a fire through that. So you can see what they were burning. That's what it looked like once they got done burning that area that year. And then again, this is 6 months after the burn. Now I want to remind you that this had been closed canopy forest that looked like this for well over 100 years. We've got pretty good data from that area that shows that had been in closed canopy forest for quite some time. We did not seed that. We did not lime that. We did not fertilize that. Those are native grasses. Big blue stem, little blue stem, and Indian grass is the majority of those grasses you're seeing there. And those rhizomes live a very long time underneath the ground. And again, they responded by having that sunlight and they came back. So fire is a very nice tool to have. Now, if you're not real sure how you're wanting to manage this, we can really use fire frequency. So how often we use that fire, we push that fire across the landscape to really manage for different goals. So this was a harvest pine, thin hardwood, and burn every 4 years. And again, this has got a lot more low cover. If you're into wildlife, this is a really good wildlife treatment. Burn about every 4 years. A lot of good browse there for white-tailed deer. So again, that's every 4 years. Here's every 3 years. We're starting to get a little more open. You're going to see a little more grass out there. If you're more into livestock and running cattle, that's a good thing. A little less canopy over the top. This is every 2 years. As you can see, we're starting to see more and more native grass and much less brush. We still see some small trees, small resprouts out there in front. But again, that every other year fire is keeping those sprouts knocked down fairly short. And then again, this was the burn annually treatment. And as you can see with annual fire, we've even knocked out some of those more mature trees and we've got pretty much full grass out there. We still do have some resprouts that you're going to see, but again, we keep them at a very short height. So again, I want you to understand in the past, back in history, fire moved across the landscape fairly frequently. A lot of our fire scar data we have shows about every 3 to 5 years in Oklahoma, we did see fire run across the landscape in most areas. Here's the really neat one for me as a livestock producer. If I look at this over here on the far left side, that control treatment, we're down around 150 pounds of usable forage production per acre for a cow. That doesn't go very far when a cow needs about 20,000 pounds of forage to get her through a whole year. But what's interesting is if we look at this harvest pine, thin the hardwood, and burn every year, we're getting up close to 2 tons of forage production. So again, drastic increase in the amount of forage we have there. Didn't really require any inputs other than a little bit of fire. This is just showing the stocking rate at acres per cow. If we were to run cows in that closed canopy forest, we'd be over 250 acres per cow. just to get her enough forage to make it through the year. Again, getting down here to that HT4, we're at about 25, 30 acres. The HT1, we're down around about 10 acres per cow, which is kind of the common stocking rate up in the Osage. So again, just some food for thought. Don't discount fire as a very useful tool for you as a forage manager. Okay, so Justin, I don't know. I guess if we got questions, you can stop me there. I'm not seeing the chat box. I don't have that open, but if we don't have any, I'm going to go ahead and move into herbicides here. And again, as we talk about herbicides tonight, read the label, as I've already stated, wear that personal protective equipment. And again, I tell the story here about 4 years ago. I was driving down the highway one day and I saw a gentleman on a small open cab tractor. He had a sprayer, 3-point sprayer on the back with a boomless nozzle, and it was spraying and fogging. The wind was blowing. He had on cut-off jeans, flip-flops, no shirt, and he's out there spraying the pasture. And I really wanted to take a picture to say this is not the proper PPEs, but he was awful close to the road, and I didn't figure he'd appreciate that. So again, a lot of these herbicides are serious. We need to take them seriously. We can see on the label how dangerous they are based on the signal word there. But I like to treat every herbicide as if it's very dangerous. And I try to wear at least at the very minimum a long sleeve shirt, long pants and boots, eye covering, and again, nitrile type gloves on your hands. What we do know from research is that if you're willing to wear a long sleeve shirt and nitrile gloves, we can reduce pesticide exposure to your body by about 99%. And that's pretty major over the long-term period, 30, 40, 50 years of you out there trying to control whether it be weeds or brush species with herbicides. Okay, starting right off, I told Justin, he mentioned we want to talk a little bit about methods of brush control, and then we're going to get into specific species. The first one we're going to start here is aerial application. And again, cost varies quite a bit, really depending on the product we're spraying and whether we're using an airplane or a helicopter. And much of that depends on the terrain, whether we're using a liquid or whether we're using pellets such as spike pellets. But again, the cost it's not cheap. One thing I always try to point out here is that if you're going in to knock out closed canopy forest, we're using spike. Let's say we're $100, $110 an acre for spike. And I can eventually get to that point, that graph I just showed you a while ago where I'm stocking a cow per 10 acres. If it costs me $100 per acre to kill that brush and I'm running a cow per 10 acres, I just put $1,000 extra on that cow's head that she has to pay for. So one thing I try to point out is a lot of times a cow can't pay for that in her lifetime. And it may be questionable if her daughter can. So you really need to sit down and figure what's the cost and what's the returns that you're going to get off doing this. Again, most of the time we get a 5 to 7 year span on these treatments, whether it's foliar or a pellets or granule application. We're probably going to need follow-up treatment. This is where I really like fire. I think this is where fire comes in the best, is on these large acreages, converting closed canopy forest back to grassland. Here's an example. This is one of bigger producers that I had years ago that I worked with. I had about 14,000 acres, but they did quite a bit of spike pellet applications. This was actually a failure of spike pellets, but you can see a lot of oak brush there that they had dozed 15 years prior and had repeatedly brush hogged. You can see a lot of the bare spots there in that Bermuda grass as well, where that spike is actually knocking some of that grass back as well. So again, that's a very viable option, especially if you're in that cross timbers area on sandy type soils with predominantly oak species. Spike works really well for you. One of the issues with spraying a liquid is going to be drift, physical drift of those droplets. And again, this was a call I got a few years back. Producer didn't know what was wrong with the trees. The producer that called me was actually the one to the north of where those browned out trees are. He was trying to figure out why his trees were browning out in the fence row. Here was an example of that. It was a little bit of a touchy situation, but I explained to him that, obviously the neighbor there beside him had an aerial applicator come in and spray Grazon next. Again, consider that if you are hiring an aerial applicator, try to keep a proper buffer from your neighbor. That way you're not drifting particles onto them. Let's be as neighborly as possible. But that is one of the bigger issues when we start looking at some of these products that we use for brush control. Drift can be an issue as well as volatilization with some of our products. So we have to keep that in mind. Again, when it comes to an aerial applicator, hire a good one. Ask for references, okay? And all the good ones that I know are glad to give you references of big farmers, big ranchers that they've worked for that will give them a good word. And I would say check those references before you get into situations, because that does happen. Always try to obtain the labels for the products that your applicator is going to use and make sure they meet label specifications for the brush species that are present. Okay, so we don't want to be off label when we're making these applications. Again, if it's coming to timber like oak timber, spike pellets will cost you more than a foliar application, but they actually work better on sandy soils and they'll give you longer lasting control. So that spike, that tebuthyron, is working there in the soil for at least 2 years. So we're getting a lot of activity from those soil applied type herbicides. And we'll talk about a couple other soil applied herbicides in a few minutes. Brush sprouts, I'm going to get into those here in a little bit, so we'll wait just a little before we discuss that in detail. But really, this is one of my more common questions I get these days, the last 2 or 3 years. And sprouts are hard to kill. They take about 3 years continuous foliar treatments, or you can use that spike, that soil applied application, to really sit there in that root zone and work on those young sprouts. And I'll tell you why that is a few slides down the road. Okay, so going through getting away from aerial, we're working into broadcast applications. I totally cut out the boom sprayer here. I think for most of our brush control, most of us try to stay away from boom sprayers. Boomless really makes the most sense because, again, we're not dragging that boom through the brush, potentially breaking it, running it on rocky ground and shaking it to death. But the boomless is really a virtue because it's much easier for us to get our release height set 3 to 4 feet above the canopy of the brush species that we're wanting to spray. So that's very important. If you've got 8-foot tall trees, I don't want to be dragging a boom across there that's 3 feet off the ground. I want to be a boomless type release or a boomless nozzle that's about 3 foot taller than the species at hand. So that's about 11 feet, 12 feet off the ground, somewhere in there. You should be selecting nozzles for the smallest size possible. And what that means is we want fairly small droplets to get better coverage, but we don't want to go super fine. Those very low micron droplets can drift more. So it's kind of a trade-off. We want to get as small as we can get for good coverage, but not so fine that we drift. And we still want to maintain a 20 to 30 foot swath width on that boomless setup. Anytime we're working with brush, if I'm spraying weeds in a pasture, or if I'm working with a producer who does, and they tell me they're putting out 10 gallons per acre, or 12 gallons per acre, I'm good with that. That's fine for ragweed and bitter sneezeweed and some of those species. If we're spraying blackberries, or definitely if we're spraying 6 to 8 feet tall oaks and elms, that's not enough carrier volume. You need to be at least 20 gallons per acre when we get into some of those bigger brush species. And honestly, 20 to 30, I'm not opposed to that. And that means more trips back to the water source, but we tend to get better control. Another option that we have here is basal sprays. And I will tell you, if you're interested in any of these different methods, we do have books through your county extension office on brush control methods. That gentleman right there in the picture wrote most of those. His name was Chris Rice. He was the former Southeast agronomist, but it's a really nice book. It kind of helps you go through the basics of these different methods. And this is just a summary of each one of those. Nice thing about basal treatments, we can be very selective about the trees that we want to knock out. We can really do those about any time of the year. They do use less chemical than a broadcast application, and they tend to work better on those large trees than spot applications will. So many of y'all have probably had some experience with basal applications. Excuse me. And again, those are typically the ones that we tend to mix with diesel. Our normal high volume treatment, the conventional mix, is about 4% herbicide in oil, and you can use crop oil concentrate, but again, diesel fuel works just as well. You would mix about 5 ounces of herbicide in a gallon of fuel or in a gallon of crop oil. You're going to apply that until the herbicide actually runs off in puddles. You're trying to be at about 18 inches off the ground level all the way down to the ground, and you spray that again until it puddles. That makes sure we get enough chemical on the lower part. You have to walk all the way around that stem to get the best control. So again, it takes a little bit of time, but it's very selective, and it's a good method for a lot of different species out there. Frill injection, this is much more labor intensive than even basal spraying, but I do put this in here because this is a very good way to be extremely selective. Basically what we're doing is making a frill or a hack. It's sometimes called hack and squirt method, but we're basically making a cut into the cambium layer of that tree, and then we're putting usually undiluted product right into that cambium layer. That tree takes that up and translocates that. We tend to get very good top kill, very good root kill with this method. Here's an example. This was a trial I did for DuPont back about 10 years ago with Velpar L, which is hexazenone. They were trying to get an above ground individual plant treatment label on that for stem treatment. And this was a hack and squirt. We put Velpar on the wisteria stems, about 80 peach trees in this orchard that you really couldn't see. At the end of the trial, 3 years later, we'd only killed 1 peach tree and we didn't have any wisteria left. So again, this is a very selective way to go in and pick out individual plants that you want to control. Spot applications with liquid, I really am starting to like these much more over the last 10 years. I use this a lot in trials with producers and fence row studies. I use this a lot on my own property. But again, it's very effective on small to medium-sized brush species, works great out in the middle of pastures with resprouts. It does cause a little bit of grass damage, but I've been very impressed with the use of either Tordon or, which is picloram, or Velpar, which is hexazenone, with the control we get on species and many different species to boot. So again, based on what type of species we're dealing with, going to kind of dictate the chemical we use. My experience has been, though, that Velpar L, which is hexazenone, has a very broad spectrum when it comes to species that it will control. We're usually putting down straight chemical, and again, we usually do that at about 2 to 4 cc's per inch of stem diameter at chest height. So a 2-inch tree at chest height would get somewhere between 4 to 8 cc's of product. And again, they do make applicator guns, as you can see there in the middle picture, that makes it much easier. Very fast way for an individual plant treatment to get control of trees. This was a trial we had on multiflora rows. We treated about 400 plants in a half-a-mile stretch of fence row. We actually had 1 plant that survived that treatment, and that was using the Velpar L. And multiflora rows is fairly difficult to get good kill on right up front. So again, fairly impressive with these spot treatments. One thing I'll often hear producers say is, I don't like the soil applied herbicides because I lose some grass production. And you will. You know, when we put that down beneath the drip line of these brush species, we're going to knock grass out. But typically what we see is 1 year after application, you can definitely see that spot. 2 years after application, grass starts to grow back in it in the spring, and by the end of summer, it's fully covered with grass again. So again, the only time I'd really worry about big bare spots is on very sandy soil where that herbicide can move fairly easily. Cut stump is another one that I really think it's important for all of us to know. And this is one that a lot of us have probably used at some point, but we really need to be considering this for all of us that have implements that go on skid steers and either shear, cut, saw trees down. we really need to be looking at cut stump treatments, because we do have so many crown sprouting species and root sprouting species in Oklahoma. If we're not treating them at cutting, we're going to have a lot more issues down the road getting that tree controlled. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get further along. But basically the same thing, 25% herbicide in a crop oil or in diesel fuel. And you're going to paint that essentially all the way around the outside of that stump, around that cambium layer, to get good control. If you are dealing with a prolific crown sprouter, or one that might have root sprouting tendencies such as honey locust, make sure that that spray runs on down to the soil level down the sides of the existing trunk. Broadcast foliar, this was probably the most common thing 15, 20 years ago. A lot of people would go out, spray 3 pints of remedy per acre. They'd spray on oaks and elms and honey locusts and bodark, and it works great on bodark, and it works pretty good on oak. Starts to fall off a little bit with winged elm when we just have remedy. And if you've ever sprayed much honey locust with remedy, you know that you better get it on every single limb and every leaf of every limb if you want to get full control. If we miss a limb, that tree will actually come back from there. So again, I think there's still a place for this, but with some of our soil applied herbicides and other techniques that we have, like basal sprays, I'm seeing a lot less of this as far as producers kind of hitting those spotty trees out in pastures. Grid applications can be done with either liquid, concentrated liquid, or pellet applications. They are fairly time and labor intensive. Where I like these grid applications is in really thick mottes of either, small trees, brushy areas, briars, maybe it's blackberry. We'll talk a little bit about greenbrier later. But again, that's a place we might want to use a grid application, is when it's just almost impenetrable to livestock. Won't spend much time here. I don't think there's as much application for these in brush control as what we see in weed control. But don't forget that there are times we can use a wick or a carpet roller to actually paint that product onto whatever brush species we have. As long as it's taller statured than the desired crop, we can put glyphosate on it as well as some other active ingredients. So in summary, brush control is a very expensive task. It does take a cow a lot of years to pay for it if that's your intent. And you need to keep that in mind. Many of these sprays, just the chemical alone is going to cost us $50 per acre, maybe more. Again, you start adding in the application, and it's not unheard of to be at $75 to $125 per acre just to get that brush control down. Consider all your different income streams. And then again, try to keep those brush invasions out of pastures at least yearly. And then adding fire back into the management system will be your cheapest option. Okay, with that, are there any questions on that? Okay. If not, we're going to roll forward. And now I'm going to get.
I got one.
Okay.
So will burning help with blackberries?
Yes. Again, we're probably not. I guess I should have mentioned this when we got started. Don't look at fire in the same light that you do as herbicide. So we don't expect to get massive loads of root control with fire. We do expect to get that with herbicides. Fire works a little differently. What we can do is keep a lot of those species suppressed. We can suppress them back to ground level. They may resprout. Again, if we're running maybe multiple species, we can increase the palatability of some of those plants. When we knock them back to a young vegetative state, we can get, again, livestock can graze on them more frequently, put a little more pressure on them. But don't expect fire to act just like herbicide and give you 90% kill of blackberry, because it won't. We'll knock out some weak plants there. We'll damage the crowns of a lot of plants, and we may kill certain plants, but we're not going to get 90% control of a certain species just by running a fire through it, such as blackberry. Does that answer the question? Hopefully. Okay. All right, so speaking of blackberry, we're going to get into some of the specific herbicide strategies for some of these different brush species. This is one that Justin mentioned he was interested in. Talking a little bit about blackberry, I hear a lot of failures from year to year, treatments that were supposed to work that didn't work. And I will tell you, blackberry is one of those that's fairly tricky to kill unless you're using that ideal strategy. And for those of you that have ever grown tame blackberries in the garden, what you know is that we really don't get cane production that first year. It takes a full year of growth before we get canes being produced, and therefore we get that bumper crop. The problem is when we look at controlling a lot of perennial species, we get the best root control when we can spray that perennial species in that in that reproductive stage. So maybe it's flowering, maybe it's fruiting. Blackberry is a prime example. Okay, we really need to be fruiting when we spray our traditional treatment. And again, my rule of thumb that I tell people is if you can go out and pick berries, make you a cobbler, scratch your chiggers, and then treat with 2 pints of remedy per acre in July, you're going to see very good control. Now, again, those have to be blackberries that have been unmolested for 1 full year. So they wasn't burnt, they wasn't brush hogged, they weren't mowed the year before. We just let them grow. I know they look unsightly, but that's how we tend to get the best control. So a lot of long-term research from OSU and other universities shows we can be 85% plus control with that treatment if we follow those directions there. If we're spraying at fruiting, what happens is when that plant goes into that reproductive stage, it produces that fruit, it then becomes concerned. And again, a plant's not thinking, it just does this naturally, but it becomes concerned about making it through winter. So it starts sending carbohydrates or energy back to the root system so it can survive winter. If we spray an active ingredient, a herbicide on that plant at that point, we tend to get very good translocation to the root. So that's why a lot of these brush type species or a lot of these perennial weeds that we fight, we need to be spraying in reproductive stages. Another good strategy for you, and we're actually just kind of coming out of the tail end of that window, is using a product metsulfuron methyl plus 2,4-D plus dicamba. That's Cimarron Max at rate 2, using it at flowering. So again, that's about a May application, sometimes late April. It will give us fairly similar control to that remedy. Okay, so I always tell people that should be your first strategy. Now with generic metsulfuron methyl being extremely cheap, that's probably the #1 strategy we should look at. And if we miss it, we can always rely on remedy later in the summer to pick up those plants. So that's blackberry. Again, try to use that proper strategy to get your timing right. Sericea lespedeza was one that Justin mentioned. We fight Sericea in both our introduced pastures. We have it in a lot of Bermuda grass in eastern Oklahoma. Actually have it in quite a bit of fescue in northeast Oklahoma. And we also fight it in a lot of our native range environments. And in native range, it's very invasive and it's actually spurred along by a spring fire. And that's a little bit of an issue because that's when a lot of our native producers tend to put a fire through that grass stand. So again, it is a major issue. One of the biggest problems with it is it drops a lot of hard seeds to the ground. So this is one that, again, it's not a one-year strategy. Don't think you can spray it once and you've knocked it out. A lot of long-term past research on Sericea has shown that remedy is effective at 1 to 1.5 pints per acre. Should give you about 85 to 90% control. Pasture guards right there in that same boat, around 90% control. Metsulfuron methyl, which used to be the old ally, it's now sold as Plotter, Patriot, MSM 60. It's not quite as effective. You're going to lose about 10% control when we look at long-term, multiple trials, multiple years. But again, now it's very, very cost effective. So that half-ounce treatment that you're seeing there is about 65 cents worth of chemical. If we look at remedy up there, we're going to be $8 to $10 worth of chemical to make that treatment. So it's a pretty big difference in the economics of these applications. We have found in year one, now I should back up and say, if you're using that metsulfuron methyl, that is a flowering application, and Cerisa flowers typically in September. So it's going to be a late fall application. I actually like this application more than the Remedy or the Pasture Guard because we don't knock out a lot of the key forbs or a lot of the legumes that our livestock rely on in some of our native range environments. So again, it depends on what you're in. If you're in Bermuda or if you're in native range, if you are in native range, you really need to be putting a tight pencil to it.
Brian?
What we do, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
What we do see in year two is that we really recommend following with a spring fire. We do know that fire encourages germination of those hard seeds, and we want that. So year one strategy is to kill the mature plant, that perennial plant that's been coming back from the root crown. Year two strategy is A, how do I get as many plants germinating as possible? And B, what can I come in with that works really well on seedling Cerisa? And past OSU research has shown that Cimarron Max, which is metsulfuron methyl, 2,4-D, and dicamba, is very effective on seedling Cerisa. So that would be a good follow-up herbicide in the spring. That would also give you a lot of just normal pasture weed control, such as ragweed, broomweed, species like that. Okay, Justin, sorry.
We've had a couple of comments since the last one. We had one question about, does brush hogging come into play with brush control? So utilizing a brush hog for brush control.
Sure. Yeah, it does. Honestly, it's probably not a lot different than fire. We don't get as many added benefits that we would from fire as far as, grass release and things like that. We do get some crowns that are actually killed by fires depending on our fire timing. So we would lose some of that with brush hogging. I think one of the biggest issues when I look at brush hogging compared to fire is just cost. We can brush hog wing down and keep it short. But many of us have probably seen some of those wing down plants that are boot top high and they're 4 foot wide and they've been brush hogged getting tall. But again, it's not going to give us much control. I hope that answered that question.
You kind of froze up there for just about 10 or 15 seconds, but
I thought you was going to say 10 or 15 minutes. And I was like, oh man.
Since you said, thanks for letting me be with y'all, you've kind of been frozen. No.
Let's hope not.
Another one was using spraying Tordon 22K with diesel, like broadcasting it.
Broadcasting it. Mm-hmm. I don't know that it's labeled for use like that. Most herbicides are only labeled for use to be broadcast with water unless it specifically states you can use another carrier. As far as I know, and again, I'd have to do a little more research on this, but as far as I know, on the label of Remedy or Tordon, the only time you can add it to a crop oil or a diesel carrier is when you're looking at basal treatments, cut stump treatments, things of that nature. It's not made for broadcast treatments. There are some labels that will allow you to do a foliar treatment where we run a crop oil or a diesel fuel carrier, but again, not running it through a big spray rig broadcasting it.
Okay, they clarified that and said that they are hand wanding it with a basal sprayer.
Okay, so, yeah, definitely with a basal spray.
Sorry, Jacob.
There are quite a few products that will allow you to do that, but again, read that label to make sure that it says you can mix it with that carrier.
And then the last one is for the Cerisa lespedeza. It's a really big weed problem for the cow guys, but the small ruminants, the sheep and goat guys, it's a preferential forage for those guys. And so
excellent forage.
They're on the other side of that. Sheep and goat guys love that stuff. So
yeah, goats do really well on it. Again, it's been touted as a natural anthelmintic because of the tannins in it. Matter of fact, my granddad back in the day, this was his preferred hay for wintering cows on. He'd mow it about 4 to 5 times a year. He'd let it get about 12 inches high and mow it before the tannins would get high. It's actually very high quality when it's young. So again, I guess, some people love it, some people don't. But again, that's kind of the basis of Serisa, where we're at as far as chemical control at this point. Again, there's other herbicides. Y'all may have heard of Chaparral. Chaparral is a great herbicide, works well on Serisa. I'm not going over a lot of those tonight because I tend to get a lot of producers say, well, I normally have Remedy, or I have metsulfuron, or I have Tordon 22K in my shop. So that's what I want to use. If you've got questions on other products as we go through this, let me know.
So Brian, does Grazon Next have any effect on Serisa?
Not much. Yes, it has suppression on Serisa, but it's nowhere near that control category that we see with Remedy and Pasture Guard, Chaparral, metsulfuron methyl.
Are they not the same? Is it not the same active ingredient as Chaparral though?
Well, it does. Chaparral has aminopyrrolid in it, the same as Grazon Next or Milestone, but it also has metsulfuron methyl, and that metsulfuron methyl is very effective on the Serisa. And actually the Chaparral label recommends you apply it during flowering at the same time as you would straight metsulfuron methyl.
Okay.
So we're getting a lot of our activity from the MSM itself. Good question. Buck brush, I think we all fight this at some times. It's kind of tricky to kill as well. There is a time early in the spring. If you'll notice kind of this lower picture, that's late in the fall. If you'll notice this middle picture, that's early in the spring. And you kind of notice this is glossy leaf down here at the bottom. A lot of times early in the year, as those leaves fully expand, you get this grayish tint to it. It's kind of a fuzz on those leaves. If you can catch it in a 2 to sometimes 4 week window, we can be pretty effective on it with 1.5 to 2 quarts of 2,4-D ester. So you can run LV4, that would be an LV4. We could run less, 1 to 1.5 quarts of like an LV6. So again, that would be a good strategy for you. Again, Chaparral is one that has shown to be really effective on buck brush in these situations. Aminopyrrolid has quite a bit of punch on buck brush, but when you mix it with MSM, it has a lot of punch on it. So that's a really good option for you if you're trying to control some buck brush. Cedars, I'll be honest with you, I really don't like chemical control on cedars. I think that it's a pretty large sink for money that it doesn't need to be. Really, fire is going to be your cheapest option. Cedars hate fire, and that's why we have cedars encroaching across the state now, as we've tried to suppress fire in a lot of these locations. So fire is your best. Mechanical is my second favorite. Maybe one thing you didn't know, as long as we cut a cedar tree below the lowest green limb, that cedar will not resprout. So cedars are not resprouters. They can't come back if we cut all the green limbs off. So again, that's why I guess my dad always had me riding fence rows every year with loppers, cutting those cedars down when they're small. But that does work. Here's a good example. This is up in Payne County. Again, this is a perfect pasture to push a fire across. We can knock pretty much every one of those little trees out with a fire. You're going to have to do that about every 3 to 5 years. Cedars do have the ability to grow 1 foot per year in height. And what's crazy is you wait 10 years on something like this and it's pretty much closed canopy again. It's totally closed up. So again, try to stay ahead of those cedar trees. Common persimmon. Anybody fight persimmon? This was a really tough species to control because it has a defense strategy. When it senses herbicide, active ingredient on it, it tends to drop its leaves off. And by doing that, it protects itself. It gives the plant itself time to break down what herbicide did get to the root, but it minimizes the translocation of that herbicide that was still in that leaf. So one of the treatments that we used to use was a very, very low treatment of Remedy. And you might do that 3, 4, 5 years in a row just to continually make them sicker. We do have a much better product now if you really fight persimmon, and that product is called Surmount. Surmount is a mixture of fluroxapyr and picloram. So picloram being Tordon. This is one you have to have your license for to use. This was a study we worked on back in the day, myself and Bob Woods. Again, this was a really serious persimmon stand, as you can see down the sides of that picture. This was 2 pints per acre. This picture was taken, I can't really see my tab up there, but this was either 1 or 2 years after application, I believe 1. And then here was 4 pints. So at 4 pints, we pretty much got 98% control. We did have a site that it didn't look as well at Okemah, and a lot of that was because we were in a very dry, droughty conditions when we sprayed. So one big thing with brush control, if you're using herbicides, don't get in the habit of trying to go out there during a drought and expect great control. Those plants really harden off, and we tend to get reduced control during droughty periods. This was a duplication of that treatment that we had over in Lincoln County near Chandler, just east of Chandler on 66. This was the untreated check. You can see there's quite a few weeds in there. There's also a lot of persimmon on this site. We looked at that in between, that happy medium treatment. Instead of doing 2 pints 2 years in a row of surmount, we thought, well, what would 3 pints 1 year look like? And we've done that here. We've also done that in about 5 or 6 other locations and got similar results. This was the year of application. You can see a lot of these persimmon skeletons out here. We got excellent knockdown, excellent burn down the year of application. But with any brush species, you need to wait at least a year, if not 2, before you call it dead. And this was 2 years after application. And again, you can see we really don't have any persimmons coming back in that strip. Pretty good grass release in that area. What's interesting to me is if y'all can all see that cedar tree over here on the left, I'll bounce back and forth. That was 2 years of growth. That cedar really starting to get it, and so are the persimmons. So again, surmount at 3 pints per acre. That's a really good option for you on persimmon. Bodark, Osage orange, hedge apple, whatever you call it, fairly easy to control. 1 to 2 pints of remedy. Chris Rice indicated that back in the day working with Dr. Stritsky, they found that 90% of the sites, they could kill mature bodark trees with 1 pint of remedy. The 2 pint is just a little bit of insurance. So again, bodarks are fairly easy to kill with triclopyr or remedy or a generic triclopyr. Honey locust. If anybody fights honey locust, this is one that's been hated for a long time. Again, a species that's fairly difficult to control with foliar applications. This is where I really like maybe basal applications of Grazon P plus D. Honey locust is fairly susceptible to picloram. It does not like picloram, which is the active in Tordon, that strong active in Grazon P plus D. I love Velpar as a soil applied treatment on honey locust. I've had about 4 or 5 different trials where we've looked at different broadcast foliar sprays. I always use Velpar as a comparative check, and I routinely get 95% or better kill of honey locust trees with soil applied Velpar. The only time I see that not work as well is on a tight soil like a clay loam, where a lot of that soil applied herbicide is tied up by soil particles. So again, that's one that foliar is probably not the best strategy. Winged elm, if you're fighting winged elm, I get a lot of people that spray that traditional old 3 or 4 pint remedy spray, and they tell me they're just not getting good control, and there's a reason for that. Winged elm is not as susceptible to triclopyr. It is fairly susceptible to picloram, though. Picloram is the active in Tordon. So again, anytime if you're using remedy already to try to pick up oak trees, mix in a little bit of picloram to go ahead and get that winged elm control, or look at something like Spike or Velpar if we're looking at individual tree treatments. Those 2 soil applied herbicides are really good on winged elm. Here's an example of some winged elm. This one here, I'm trying to remember. I really can't remember if that was a 3 pint remedy plus 1 pint Tordon or if it was Velpar. but I'll tell you, both of those should look about the same. You should be bumping up that 95% control or better. If you're dealing with oaks and you're on sandy ground, again, spike is hard to beat. Spike works really well on sandy ground. It gives you a couple of years of activity there where it can keep working on that. If you're looking at a foliar option, 2 quarts or 4 pints of Remedy also provides really good control of post oak and blackjack as well. You're probably going to need some follow-up when we look at any of these species. Now, this is a Velpar treatment of oaks. And again, as you can see, we did a really good job. This was a sandy loam soil, so we got a little bigger spots there. But this producer indicated to me, he said, I don't care if it's killing that much grass because those trees were about to knock all my grass production out in that field. And again, you can go to that site today. This was about 7 or 8 years ago. That's a totally open field right there now. It looks really good. So don't count out if you're getting a lot of encroachment. You know, sometimes we've got to go to a little more severe herbicide option.
Brian, we got another question.
Okay, that'd give me a chance to get a drink here.
Just the questions of using Velpar in a basils or cut application. If you're using it,
Can't do that.
Can't do it. But what about the damage to bigger trees around some of these smaller trees? If your soil applies.
Okay, that's a good question. And yeah, I showed the picture earlier of wisteria in a peach orchard with Velpar, but it never did get the label for above ground application for stem application before DuPont sold their products off to Bayer. So again, you can't use Velpar in a hack and squirt or basal treatment or anything like that. It's only for soil applied treatments for brush. Yes, if you've got big trees that you want to keep, stay away from them, okay? The best rule of thumb is that a tree's root system is going to be about twice the diameter of the canopy. So if I'm going from the trunk to the edge of the limb is 30 feet, I'm going to stay at least 60 feet away from that trunk with applications of Velpar. That's going to be pretty safe. Same way with Tordon, same way with spike. Those tend to move a little bit in the soil. They can move a little bit. But again, those roots go a long ways on those big trees. So you need to keep that in mind. Good question. I apologize. I'm starting to cough here, but allergies have been really bothering me here this last week.
So the follow-up question to that's treating small trees around bigger trees. What's
treating small trees around bigger trees? Got you. What I would do is probably a basal application of triclopyr. Let's say that's Remedy and a crop oil or a diesel fuel, something like that. I would be very careful with the products that have a lot of soil residual. I could do even a low volume application of picloram in an oil carrier. So Tordon in an oil carrier at a low volume application. I'd be okay with that as well. And again, we can get away from Velpar. We can go to hack and squirt. We can use products like Remedy, Tordon, things like that. We can still do the hack and squirt with other products, just not Velpar. I see what you're saying now. I'm slow sometimes, Justin.
No, you knew that. You answered the first question. That was a follow-up question to the first.
Yeah.
So you're doing
okay. All right. Okay, so I'm going to get on my soapbox here for just a little bit. And if you got a skid steer and you're controlling brush, I'm not trying to step on your toes. I'm trying to help you. But one of the biggest things I'm running into the last 4, 5, 6 years is these skid steer attachments have made it super simple to go in and knock down even big trees. The problem is, again, if you do that and you don't control that tree first, you have to understand you're probably going to have to wait 3 to 5 years to get broadcast control of that tree again. And the reason is, if you look at that picture down at the bottom and we cut that tree on the left, and let's say it's 15 foot tall and 15 foot wide, you can see that root system underneath it. Now we've got a resprout coming back and it's 4 foot tall and it's 1.5 feet wide and it's growing like gangbusters. We can't get enough herbicide, enough active ingredient absorbed through the leaf on that plant on the right to kill that entire root system. Okay, there's just not enough leaf surface area to supply chemical to the root. So that's the problem with cutting off some of these resprouters, whether it be crown sprouters or root sprouters, if we don't control them ahead of time. Really, the only thing you're left with is to use a soil applied herbicide, in year 1 or 2 after you cut it, or you can come in and you can spray 3, 4, 5 years in a row with a pretty strong foliar and kill it, which to me is a whole lot of cost. Or you just let it grow back for about 3 or 4 years and then come in with the recommended foliar spray. So please, if you're going to do that, it's a great tool. My recommendation is spend the extra $500 and get the attachment that you can actually do a cut stump treatment as you cut that tree off. They make them for these skid steers. They got a little button. You push the button, it sprays your selected chemical out on that cut stump, and it keeps you from having a lot of headache. I dealt with a guy year before last that had a full section up in Nowata County, just out west of Nowata, of honey locust and bodark, and he went in and cleaned a full section for a whole year. Hired a guy to run that skid steer basically every day, and he has the worst resprouts you've ever seen in your life, and there's really not much we can do with them at this point but let them grow. So again, keep that in mind. If you've got sprouts, and it's usually oak and winged elm, it's what we fight a lot in eastern Oklahoma, they're going to be fairly difficult with foliar applications. You need to know that. Those sprouts are hard to kill. But again, 2 quarts of remedy, 3 years in a row should pick it up. 10 pounds of spike would do equally well. Maybe save you a little bit of headache and a couple years worth of labor there. If you've got 100% canopy cover and we're trying to thin that timbered area out, again, 10 pounds of spike, 2 quarts or 4 pints of remedy on post oak and blackjack. If we got winged elm in any of these situations, remember, winged elm needs some picloram to really boost that control. So we're going to go 1 quart or 2 pints of remedy and 2 pints of Tordon. Okay. Here is, so that was kind of the same spray that we use out in the pasture. Here's the one I get a lot of questions about. This was the old OSU fence row weed control mixture. I get lots of calls on this. I know our educators do. This one we call Muy Caliente. This is very, very hot spray, but if you're trying to kill basically everything in a fence row, this is the one to do it. Again, stay away from some of those desirable trees. But this will kill vines, briars, trees, whatever you might have. You're going to mix 1 quart of remedy, 1 gallon of P plus D, and 1 quart of really high quality surfactant in 100 gallons of water. Okay, and you're going to spray that to the point that each leaf makes a droplet, makes a drip. Okay, and that's a really good spray. That'll burn down just about everything in a fence row. Again, you can also use Velpar or Tordon in spot applications down that fence row, or spike pellets as well. So those are options for you in fence rows where you're really not wanting to save any trees. Okay, and we're going to kind of wrap it up here. I guess I'm going about 10 minutes over, but
Hey,
quite a few. Yeah.
Another is on timing for basal spraying.
Yeah.
And the question specific about honey locust, but what is the best time to spray brush a lot of times?
Okay, so for basal spraying, we've got a pretty big window. Really, the one time I'd say stay clear is right during leaf expansion. Okay, so that's kind of right now. There's a lot of nutrients coming up in the plant going to the leaves for those leaves to grow. Once we get to full leaf, we open up that window. You can apply through summer. You can apply in the winter on basal sprays. That's a good winter chore to do. Winter basal sprays work really well. If we're talking about normal brush control, foliar applications, a lot of times we want to be again at full leaf, but before that plant hardens off in droughty conditions, dry conditions. So most of the time we're going to be late June, early July, somewhere in there. As long as we're not super dry in the soil, that's the perfect time to be spraying most of these applications. Okay, so again, if you got greenbrier, really that fence row spray that I just mentioned will give you a significant amount of burn. there is no labeled herbicide for greenbrier control. Okay. Trust me, I've searched and searched it, and it's just not out there. I will tell you that Chris Rice and I thought we had found one at one point, and we took it to 7 different locations, and we were able to duplicate it on 4 locations. But again, as long as you've got a sandy soil or a shallow soil, I could probably show you some results here. This would be a grid treatment of Velpar. You can see there we're dealing with a lot of greenbrier, persimmon. There was blackberry in there, winged elm, a lot of winged elm in that site. Just basically grown up to the point cows didn't even walk through that. It was hard to get in and get our grid treatments down. But again, 3 cc's of Velpar every 1 square meter is what we put out on this site. This was 30 days after application. We're already getting good uptake. We got a little rain on that. Started burning some of those species down. 1 year after application, we felt like heroes on this site. It was looking really good. And this was 2 years after application. So on that site, we were actually able to knock a lot of that back. The producer ended up moving on down that hill and kind of finishing that out over the next 10-year period, I guess 8-year period. So again, that's an option for you. If you get on a tighter silt loam soil though, or maybe it's a very deep fertile soil, it's not going to work like that. Okay. Again, we get a lot of that herbicide tied up by soil particles, and you're going to see some little holes come up in those greenbrier mottes, but it won't look anything like what you're seeing there in the picture. The last one I put in, Justin didn't ask for this, but this is one that I feel like is going to be one of our most major invasive pests, maybe in the next 20 or 30 years. Back in 2008, I actually had a couple research trials on these. We were starting to see these when I was down at Stigler. And back then I was doing some work for DuPont with Velpar. Saw really good results with Velpar on this flowering pear. This is essentially a Bradford pear that everybody plants in their yard. Bird picks up the fruit. They take the fruit out in a pasture on a fence row, and that goes through their digestive tract, drops out the back, and it comes back up and it reverts back to the genetics of its parents. And a lot of those parent plants have large thorns, as large as honey locust. So I was getting a lot of producers, as you can see in that lower right picture, had a lot of trees. They were getting flats on tractors and trucks. And that's when we started looking at this. And that's been quite a while ago. And I see them get worse every year. So I've got quite a few trials going on this. I've got some very large acreage demos now that we've done. A couple of those have been aerially applied with an airplane. What we're seeing really good results with small trees, less than 3 foot high out in pastures, is 1.5 to 2 pints of 2,4-D, and that can be 2,4-D amine, and 1/2 ounce of metsulfuron methyl. That's a really good mixture for ragweed, bitter sneezeweed, cuckleburr, all of our normal pasture weeds, but it's doing a really good job on the flowering pear as well. That metsulfuron methyl is really tough on that flowering pear. So again, that's an option for you if you're fighting that. Maybe if you're close to the suburbs of a city, you're probably seeing a lot more of those.
Brian, the most effective treatment we have here is a good ice storm. That pretty well kills all of them around here.
Yeah, that's true. They are pretty weak wooded.
Another thing, I don't know if you mentioned it about like the locust. You know, one of the things we've seen about locust is if you don't kill that root, if you just cut them off and you don't, those things are very aggressive root sprouters too. And you'll have all along those root lines, those things will sprout back up and you'll have a horrible problem with them if you don't get them controlled from the root.